All right, it is just after 7 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's webinar. Hopefully, you can all hear me okay. I know we've had some audio issues in the past, so if those arise again, just put a message either in the chat window or in the Q&A window, and I'll make sure that I fix it, or we'll try to make an adjustment. So tonight we're going to be talking about FEGLI and life insurance and whether or not you're exposed or maybe you have too much. I do see a lot of familiar faces on the webinar tonight. So for those of you who have been on before, welcome. Welcome back. And then for those of you who are new, welcome. A little bit of background about myself and our company. Our company is PARCO. It stands for Pension Americans Retirement Company. And we work with federal employees across the country and around the world, helping them plan their retirements no matter what stage of their career that they're in. And we help mid-career, early career, and late career, wanting to make sure that you all take advantage of the unique benefits offered to you as federal employees. We've presented at a lot of really cool places, like at the Pentagon, at Walter Reed, and for some folks that work for the Forest Service, and we've been featured in a lot of different publications. So tonight, we're going to be talking about life insurance, and we're going to go through first planning a legacy and what that means. Then we'll talk about life insurance is. We'll go through some of the basics about FEGLI. We'll talk about the other legacy benefits that you have. We'll talk about bridging and doing the planning gap for life insurance. Then we'll talk about some long-term FEGLI planning and long-term FEGLI strategies, and then we'll conclude with some action items and takeaways. Hopefully that sounds good to everybody, and we'll go ahead and get started. Let's kick it off by talking about planning and legacy. And the real question that every one of us has to ask, whether we're 30 or whether is what happens to my family if I pass away? Of course, they'll be obviously very, very upset that it's a horrible thing to have happen. But tonight we're going to talk about the finances of it. So, what goes to your heirs? Well, all of the things that you have, all of your assets, all of the legacy planning benefits that you have, pass on to your estate when you die, to your beneficiaries. And we're going to highlight this a couple times, and we say this all the time here at Parco. Federal employees are different because of some of the benefits and things that you have available to you. But if you pass away, whether you work for the federal government or your private sector, your beneficiaries look at things like your real estate, your 401ks or your TSP, any IRAs that you have, your cash and your savings, any collectibles that you have, other assets, and then on top of that, life insurance. And that constitutes your estate. And so when people ask, how much do I need to leave behind? Well, it all depends on what your goal is. Some people say, hey, look, I just want to make sure that my burial's covered, my final expenses are covered. That's all the way to one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum are folks that we talk to that say, hey, look, I want to leave as much behind as possible because I want to provide intergenerational wealth for my kids and my grandkids and do all that stuff. There's no wrong answer, but what your priority is what determines how much you need to have in your estate if you were to pass away. Somebody that only wants to leave behind a little bit needs a lot less than somebody that wants to pass on much more. So when it comes to how much you need to leave behind, it really comes down to what your goals are and what you're trying to protect. And one of the unique things at Parco with us is that we've thought really, really deeply about this because some people will say, you'll go online and look, and there's all these different rules of thumb. Well, we said, look, what's your goal? Some people say, hey, look, I just want to cover my funeral. Maybe more and more people say, I want to replace my income if I pass away, take care of my parents, especially for younger folks. I know they're always worried about that. Maybe you want to have your mortgage paid off or help pay for your college education for your children if something were to happen to you. Or maybe even leave an endowment to your university, some kind of like longer term, really big legacy gift. And so rather than just have rules of thumb, we've tried to really take a thoughtful mathematical approach to how much you need to leave behind. And our platform and our team have come up with what we think is a really, really easy way to think about how much life insurance you need to leave behind. And let's take an example of somebody like Larry. He's 51 years old, and his spouse is 49 years old. They have two kids, 8 years old and 10 years old. He makes $100,000 a year, and he has a $300,000 mortgage. He'd like to replace his income if he passes away. He'd like to pay off his mortgage if he passes away, cover his funeral, and cover his education expenses for his kids. So we know Larry makes $100,000 a year. how much do we need to leave behind to replace his salary? Well, again, at Parco, we've done things a lot more mathematically and scientifically. We say, well, look, Larry, your salary is $100,000, but when we net that after deductions, taxes, things like that, you're usually used to living on about 65% of that gross number. That's a really good rule of thumb. And we've stress tested that against all of our clients, and it's a very robust estimate. So $65,000 a year net is the amount that we need to replace for Larry's spouse. So what that really means is we need to say, okay, given that amount, how much would it cost in the market today for us to buy an annuity that replaces that $65,000 for a 49-year-old female? And we can look in the market and see that that number today is $1.8 million. That's how much protection he would need to cover the income replacement. Now, on top of that, he says, hey, look, I'd like my mortgage and my funeral costs covered as well. Those two combined together based on what his mortgage balance is and based on what sort of like the average funeral and final expense coverage is for $310,000 in coverage. And then for his kids, again, we've developed this formula, which is basically meant to be on top of an income replacement when you want to help pay for education, other things that a kid could need. What's a good, robust formula? And so it's this formula of the age of 26, which is usually how long kids can stay on their parents' health care, minus their age, divided by 26 times your salary times two. And what this formula implies is that the 8-year-old would need an additional $138,000 in coverage, and the girl would need an additional $122,000 in coverage to cover things like education. So those two together is $260,000 on top of the income replacement, on top of the mortgage being paid off, all of that. So the total estate need for Larry is $2.4 million as a 51-year-old man. That's what our goal is. That's the amount of protection that we need to have. Now, Larry has some assets and he also has some legacy benefits. So he has $450,000 saved in his TSP, his 401k. He has $200,000 in savings, and then he also has some unique for his employee benefits that we're going to talk about. So, first thing, his TSP, that's part of his estate, that's 450,000. Next is his savings. That's another 200, that's $650,000. So, right now it seems like his gap is about $1.72 million. Is there anything else that we need to consider? Well, he has some life insurance through work. And when it comes to life insurance, what is life insurance? Life insurance is a contract between an insurer and a policy owner that guarantees that the insurer will pay a sum of money to beneficiaries if the insured dies before during the covered period. Right? That's what life insurance is. It's meant to protect your family in the case of your premature passing. It's meant to be extra money paid on top of your estate to your beneficiaries. And with life insurance, there's several different types of life insurance, but they all have these three core concepts or three core attributes. There's the premium, which is how much it costs every month or every quarter or every year. That's how much you pay for the insurance. There's the coverage amount, which is how much in benefit would be paid out if you were to pass away. And then there's the term, which is how long you're covered or the covered period. So something like term life, this is the simplest and cheapest type of life insurance, right? This is the one that covers you over a specific period of time if you pass away early. Things like guaranteed universal life and index universal life, these are coverages that can last through your entire life and they can cost a lot more because they might have differing other benefits like extra cash value, extra living benefits, things like this. Some of you may have even been pitched on the idea of using some kind of like be your own bank or buy some expensive universal life policy. We're not going to be covering that tonight, but by and large, our view here at Parco is that you should try to spend as little as necessary on life insurance because it's just a tool to be there in case you pass away. It's we've seen so many clients get twisted up and get into bad deals because they got sold a product that they were told, oh, this is how you're going to get rich, and it ends up just sucking lots of money out of their bank account when they could otherwise allocate those funds other places. So at Parco, we really focus primarily on the term side of things. And so, with that kind of mentioned, let's talk a little bit about some FEGLI basics. So again, as federal employees, you guys have some unique benefits through, on top of all the other things that you have access to, you have federal employee group life insurance. This is life insurance offered by your employer to you. It is underwritten by MetLife. So while FEGLI sort of like services everything, the insurer itself is MetLife. Within FEGLI, there are different types of FEGLI that you can choose from. There's basic life, then there's three optional coverages: option A, option B, and option C. Basic life is a salary multiple, is your salary rounded up to the nearest thousand plus $2,000. Option A is a flat $10,000. Option B is what we call the salary multiplier, and option C is family coverage. So if you make, let's say, $100,000 a year, and you had basic life, you'd have $102,000 of basic life. If you had option A, you'd have $10,000 in option A. If you had option B, you could have between 100 and $500,000 in coverage in increments of 100,000. If you have option C, this is coverage not on you, the federal employee, but on your spouse and on your kids under age 22. You could have between $2,500 and $25,000 in coverage. So let's get back to Larry, right? So he's got some of these legacy benefits. He's got his TSP, he's got his savings, but then we also know he has basic life, option A, five multiples of option B, and he has five multiples of option C. So the basic life that he has is $102,000 in coverage. He's paying 35.36 per month for that. That's extra part of his estate, reducing his coverage gap. He also has that optional option A coverage. It's an extra $10,000 in coverage. Doesn't cost very much per month, $2.17. You can see it's kind of a nice thin sliver in there. Then he has option B. He has five times his salary on this. He's paying $108.50 per month. So again, there's another $500,000 when we include basic life, option A, and option B. And then there's option C. So he has five units of option C, five multiples. So that means he has $25,000 in coverage on his spouse if she were to pass away, and $12,500 in coverage on each of his kids if either of them were to pass away. He's paying $9 per month for that. That doesn't factor into his estate because it's coverage not on him, but on his family members. I hope everybody's tracking so far. So still, even after his FEGLI, it seems like Larry has about $1 million gap, almost $1.1 million gap. Well, that is true. However, there are other legacy benefits that many of you may not actually realize you have as federal employees. There's the basic employee death benefit, and then there's a survivor benefit. So the basic employee death benefit, some of you may not have heard of this, is an extra benefit paid to your family on top of everything else that you have if you pass away while working for the federal government. It's calculated as your salary divided by two plus a constant that they adjust every year. And for this year, it's just about $44,000. So in Larry's case, he has a basic employee death benefit if he passes away while working of almost $94,000 on top of everything else. Now his gap is below $1 million, that coverage gap. You also have access to a survivor benefit. This means that if you pass away while working for the federal government, on top of everything else, your spouse would receive an automatic 50% survivor benefit. They will also get to keep your federal employee health care while if you're gone. So in Larry's case, if he were to pass away right now, given his years of service and his high three, we estimate his pension would be $19,200 per year. If we take 50% of that, that's $9,600 per year that would go to his wife, or $800 a month. So what's that worth? Well, we do the same math that we did earlier. We say, well, look, how much would it cost for a 49-year-old woman to buy $800 a month in cost of living adjusted income for the rest of her life? Well, what's an annuity like that cost? And we find that the present value of that survivor benefit is $269,000. So on top of that, when we add up all of his estate planning assets, instead of that gap being, several $1 million, his gap now is $690,000. So how do we bridge that gap? Well, for somebody like Larry, what's $680,000 of coverage cost for a 51-year-old man? And depending on how long we need that coverage for, it could be between $72 and $227 per month. And keep in mind, this gap does change over time, right? We see a lot of folks that we work with who are way overinsured, right? They have too much life insurance for what they need because their kids have gotten older, so they don't need to protect that. Maybe their mortgage is paid down, or maybe there's as they get older, the income that they need to replace goes down because they're closer to the mortality. So what's really powerful about the platform that we've built for you all is that it dynamically evaluates this. So it's constantly refreshing to tell you exactly how much life insurance you need, and it'll also and coverage that you would need, and it'll also notify you when you're in a surplus and start to talk about ways that you should drop that coverage to save yourself some premium every month. So we've already talked a lot about a lot of different things tonight, but now let's talk a little bit about long-term FEGLI planning because a lot of you, I'm sure, are close to retirement age and you're wondering, hey, I've got some FEGLI basic life, I've got some other optional FEGLI coverages. What's going to happen to this when I retire? Well, basic life, by far the most common option is to do what's called the 75% reduction option. What that means is that when you retire, as soon as you turn 65 or retire, whichever happens second, your FEGLI coverage, your basic life, will begin to reduce by 2% per month until it gets down to 25% of its value. So, what does this mean practically? This means that, let's say you had $102,000 of FEGLI basic life coverage, that would reduce down to $25,500 in coverage uh, over the course of 3 years after you turn 65, which you would have for life. So, what's the implication? Most federal employees have basically a built in burial policy because of that basic life reduction. So, if you're getting sold a burial policy or burial insurance, keep in mind you may not need that because you have basic life. Now, option A works very similarly to basic life in retirement, automatically begins reducing at retirement or 65 down to 25% of its value or $2,500. Next is option B, and we're going to spend a minute or so talking about this because with option B, it's one of those things that we know gets more expensive over time. And so if you have it, it can make, and you want to keep life insurance, it can make sense to look at other options. And then as you get closer to retirement, we do see a lot of folks drop it. And let's walk through why. Because as you can see here, these premiums, as they go up every 5 years, they're kind of doubling. So take Larry again. He's 51 years old. He's in good health, and he has five multiples of option B. He makes 100 grand a year. Well, if he keeps this option B for the next 10 years, he will pay over $22,000 in premium. If he keeps it for another 20 years, he'll pay over $93,000 in premium. If he keeps it another 30 years, he'll pay almost $300,000 in premium. On average, over 90, almost $10,000 per year for this life insurance. Look, the deal is that life insurance is always cheaper the younger you are. Basically, the pricing always goes up, even in the private sector, about 7% every year as you get older. So, if life insurance is a priority for you and you have FEGLI option B, it's always worth looking at alternatives because they can be. Now, look, there are exceptions to that. There's folks that can't get life insurance other places, and so FEGLI option B is really powerful for them. But if it is a priority for you, compare the options because it could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of your career and retirement. Because take a look at this. So you can see how the FEGLI really starts to balloon in price over time, whereas term, this is showing cumulative payments. It's a nice straight linear line. With an audience this size, we always mention this. Option C again is coverage not on you, the federal employee, but on your spouse and on your kids. And with an audience this size, some of you may actually be owed a reimbursement for your option C premiums. Well, how's that possible? Well, if you are enrolled in option C and you are not married and your kids are over age 22. So all three of those things have to be true. You have to be enrolled in option C, you have to not be married, and your kids have to be over age 22. Then you're enrolled in that option C, you are paying for life insurance that you don't have. And if that's you, you're owed a refund. And if if you'd like, or it's something that we help folks with every single day here at Parco, you can let us know. We've got a form letter that we send in, and we've had clients get thousands of dollars back because they were paying for option C for years and years and years and didn't realize it. Another important insurance tip is that it's always best to be proactive, right? Making sure that you either have the coverage that you need. There's no reason why to overpay for things like this. And then also make sure you update your beneficiaries regularly. What I mean by this is that we've had some folks that we talked to who said, "Hey, look, yeah, I haven't updated my beneficiaries in a while, and ex-spouse is actually the named beneficiary." Well, if you pass away and your ex-spouse is the named beneficiary, that money's going to go to the ex-spouse. So make sure that if you've had a life change or if something needs to change, you update those beneficiaries. And it's important also to know that you should let your beneficiaries know that they are beneficiaries, right? Like life insurance companies make a lot of money on the interest from unpaid claims. So if your beneficiaries don't have to know that they're going to get a big chunk of money if you pass away, but they should know that they are a beneficiary. So that way, if something happens to you, they know where to go get it. So in terms of like the FEGLI big takeaways, basic life's a pretty good deal. Option A is neutral. Option B can get expensive, and option C you might be owed a reimbursement. And one of the nice things about the Parco platform is, in addition to being really active in making life insurance recommendations, it also allows you to see all of your life insurance in one place. So we've talked about a lot already tonight. And when we think about like the kind of FEGLI and retirement planning checklist, first determine how big of an estate that you need. Next is evaluate your net assets and your life insurances. Figure out if there's a shortfall or a surplus. Drop any unnecessary FEGLI coverage. If you have a surplus, there's no reason to keep paying for it. If you think you need to keep life insurance and keep FEGLI, evaluate the private options to see if they're cheaper, to save yourself some money every month because it is a commodity. Check if you're owed a reimbursement for your FEGLI option C. And then we'd encourage everybody to create a Parco account, schedule a time to meet with one of our teammates to evaluate your life insurance situation, FEGLI situation, and a whole lot more. So as always, it's a pleasure to present to you all this evening. I look forward to answering all any questions that you have. I always like to remind an audience like this, like our presentation tonight came up because an audience member a couple weeks ago asked about us presenting FEGLI, and so we built this presentation for them. So if there's um, other cover, please let us know because we always like to build these things to be valuable for you all. So with that, I'll open up the floor for questions. Okay, so there's a great question here asking why do we not suggest whole life? So whole life can be just really expensive. So, I think Brandy, you're bringing up a good question that maybe we should like do a deeper presentation on. But whole life is just for the amount of coverage that you get. Say for a $100,000 of coverage, whole life on average costs about 5 times as much as comparable term coverage. So we always think in terms of opportunity cost. So let's say that whole life might cost you $100 a month, and a term life policy would cost you $20 a month for the same amount of coverage. Well, yeah, the whole life might be building up some cash value, but the person that's spending $20 on term dollars, let's say, into their TSP and into an investment account, which might be able to grow a lot more aggressively over the long run versus having the embedded fees in whole life. Yes, you can borrow from your whole life. That there are some situations like that, but generally, especially for the folks that we work with, it tends not to be the thing we first recommend. Of course, if you've got a lot of surplus capital you're trying to put to work and you want to put your money into whole life, we can look at it. But I'll be honest with you, a lot of the times we're working with folks and they get sold a whole life policy because a guy came to their office or like they saw something on Facebook and it's like, oh, this is what all the rich people do. Well, yeah, rich people buy whole life, but they buy more of everything. And they're rich. They have whole life because they're rich. They're not rich because they have whole life. And I think some people purposely obfuscate that fact. So for us, looking with our client base, it's always like, what would I want to recommend to my mom? What makes the most sense for them? And it's hard for us to justify the whole life. Um, There's been specific situations where that wasn't the case, but by and large, um, it's too expensive for the dollar. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to let everybody go for the evening. Our next webinar is going to be on a topic we're really excited. Valuable your all's pension is. One of the things that we notice with a lot of federal workers that we work with is that they always think they're behind maybe their peers, the folks that their neighbors down the street because they say, oh well, my TSP is not as big as my neighbor's 401k or all these different things, and so we want to challenge that because oftentimes you guys are actually in way better shape for retirement than your private sector counterparts. So we're going to be going through that next week. So as always, it's a pleasure to present to you all. Thanks for all for being on tonight. Reach out to us if you have any questions. Make sure you create your account on goparco.com, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care, everyone.